of the Lord. It's somehow, we need another response to that gospel. This is a continuation of a series of sermons I have done intermittently over the last several years. It sounded like I was encouraging you all to become a Buddhist for 2 or 3 sermons a few years ago, as I was reading a number of books on Buddhism. And actually, the title of the series might be called, What Do We Have in Common with the Rest of the World? What do we have common with people when we meet them who are of other faiths? What do they have to teach us? Well, today I'm going to inflict upon you, and this is one of the great privileges and fun of preaching, my current reading, which is a book by a Dr. Settles, who studied under a man who studied under Boas, anthropologist, about the Northwest Indians and their religion and culture. And I think it has some insights into human nature which will be useful. And of course, we heard one of the greatest primitive texts just read by Sarah a few moments ago about the golden calf worshiping incident in Genesis, and how God was going to destroy all of the Israelites until that very successful attorney, Moses, the lawgiver, persuaded God to wait and destroy Israel at another time. It really wasn't meant to be funny, but it does have its wry difficulties, doesn't it? The Northwest Indians are, of course, one of the anthropologists' most favorite Indian cultures, and they're interesting for a whole variety of people. They have various languages which can be traced. For a while, Boas thought that you could trace their particular physical characteristic, but I think he gave up on that before too long. But the interesting questions, for example, that come to mind are, did the Indians have a god, and did they worship that god? And we modern Christians tend to think that, of course, everybody invents God. I mean, didn't the Israelites make a golden calf? And does everybody want to worship that God, be it a true God or a false God? Well, that's really probably not the case. How's that for a very definite sentence? The Northwest Indians, for the most part, did not have a God. There are some possible exceptions, and when you start reading about their mythologies talking about a God, it turns out that probably that came from Christian sources. And those Christian sources, incidentally, come from 2 directions. They might have come from the area around Walla Walla, where I went to college, and where those Indians went back looking for Anglican missionaries, because they had originally learned about the Christian faith through Christian fur trappers who happened to be English. The other origin probably was from the interior of British Columbia, where there were French Roman Catholic missionaries. Christianity, or something that you could perhaps call Christianity, nascent Christianity, filtered into the coast from those directions, and they don't know, but they may also have come from the fur traders and explorers who were going up and down the coast. And there just was no clear evidence of God versus no God, or a God that you worship. But an interesting thing to that, in addition, is that, as you have often heard me mention, Christian theism is far more definite in the period after Constantine became empire than it was before the Nicene and other creeds and doctrinal questions were addressed. And the reason for that is quite simple. There's a long tradition in the Old Testament. That tradition is echoed in the teachings of Jesus, that God is not defined, placed, and put in a particular box or category. God is, in many, many cases, in fact, I would say in most cases, not defined, not placed in a box. He is the one beyond all of those things we can see, hear, and know. Another question that we find discussed in the Northwest Indian traditions, and remember, when you talk about Northwest Indian traditions, we are talking about a lot of traditions, a lot of tribes, and even the word tribe may not apply. In fact, it applies only with difficulty. The relation of human beings to the rest of creation. You know, part of Moses' law was that when you ate an animal, you killed it according to a certain ritual manner. You presented the blood, which in the Hebrew tradition, early Hebrew tradition, was a life, and the life you offered back to God, and the meat you got to eat. The Indians have a first salmon ceremony, and they also have rituals and ceremonies to go whale hunting or sea lion hunting, or for killing an elk or a deer or a bear. And if any of you were ever 4-H'ers, you are aware of the great ritual. It's not formulated, and you won't read it in the 4-H books, about how do you raise that pet cow or pig and then sell it at the fair, and someone eats it. Well, I understand most 4-H families make it a point of always eating someone else's cow or pig or goat. Yours you sell to someone else who looks after it and it lives happily ever after. Most people have an ambiguous relationship with the animals on which we depend upon for our lives by eating. You know, we know that in some sense we, like them, are animals, but yet these animals are eaten by us. And what's privileged about us? Well, you know, we are privileged, and but we should feel a little bit of discomfort about it. And I'm always very sympathetic with my vegan friends whose principal concern very often is the ethical one of how poorly we treat animals in factory processing places. And again, I don't just see how anyone can help but have some sympathy with people who are disturbed about how we treat animals in modern industrial farming. Although I'm not proposing anything to do about it. Other questions which come to mind are we separate very greatly the natural versus the supernatural. And Suttle's, and if any of you are interested in Northwest anthropology, Suttle's book, he was a UW guy, is just short of 300 pages, really good. He approaches everything with a sort of agnosticism I like. He says, you know, this is what we commonly hear, but there are reasons not to accept things necessarily as we commonly hear. But anyway, you know, the Indians would not in their actual everyday life see that much difference between themselves and a deer and an elk and Sasquatch and other spirit things that were just part of their natural life. And some of the other books that we're reading were talking about how you might be in your canoe and suddenly, for no apparent reason, this great whirlpool reached up and threatened your life and maybe killed some of the people on your canoe. And all other sorts of very strange things would happen. And other thing is the difference between the sacred and the profane. We tend to make a great distinction between what is sacred and what is profane. Don't burn the flag. Don't desecrate the altar. We all hear that, and we kind of believe it, and I kind of act on those kinds of beliefs. But Jesus might say, if he was at a conference where we were talking about what is sacred and what is profane, he might say, what is more sacred about our tabernacle with the Eucharistic elements in it, and a drunk in a gutter? In God's eye, in Jesus' eye, the drunk in the gutter is as sacred as that. And it's something that, Christendom greatly complicated Christianity, and it came up with a whole variety of rules that, in effect, in my term, helped us to disbelieve the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount presents an ethical system which holds up against any biblical criticism or desecration or cynicism. It speaks to the heart, and it speaks the truth in a way which reaches so deeply and so cuttingly. We perceive ourselves sometimes as doing pretty well and being pretty good. Read the gospel and tremble with holy terror. And God is speaking to us in those moments. And the answer, of course, in the midst of terror, is to seek out love, to do good, and to hear God.
Let us join together in the Nicene Creed.